I find it interesting that a lot of companies put this in their, not their mission statement, but their values. It's like, be your most authentic self, but then everyone has their own definition of what authenticity is. Like, what about for you? When people tell you to be your most authentic self, or when you hear the word authenticity, like what comes to mind for you?
If there's no straightforward answer to that question for me, because I think I've been on a journey to figure that out for a while now, and I'm literally going through it right this second. I was sharing with some of my colleagues at work that when people talk about bringing their best self to work or their most authentic self to work, I cringe at it because I was brought up doing the whole opposite. I mean, the whole way to survive, back in the 1970s and 1980s was about assimilation. That was the thing. Make sure that you lay low, you don't cause any trouble, you put your head down, speak English, don't speak with an accent. And my whole life has been about that, about assimilating, about fitting in, about blending in. So when people say bring your authentic self to work, did you mean the one that maybe I lost 40 years ago, or that I never really connected with? Or I don't even know what that means. I mean, I literally am like, if I hadn't gone through assimilation, would I still be the same person I am now? I wish I had this like perfect answer to that question, but I think at the moment, if I had to say like, what is my authentic self right this second, it is the exploration of who I am, the parts of me that are Latina, the parts of me that are American, the parts of me that are from Queens, the parts of me that are, that are from where I live now, being a mom, being a wife, like that's, I think, where it sits for me right now. But there's a big sort of cultural identity question that I'm in the process of trying to answer. And I don't know the answer to it, honestly.
No, I appreciate that vulnerability, because I think many of us are still on that journey. People think that, when you get to a certain point of your career, then it's all figured out, but that's not true either. But tell me a little bit more about that assimilation. Like, when did you realize at one point that you were assimilating? Because I think for many of us, we do it, but it just becomes second nature.
Yeah, now I look back and think there were some points in my life where, they were signals of that, where was making a conscious decision about it. Well, I remember, first of all, my parents both spoke Spanish, so I don't remember even ever learning English, except I found out my parents put me in front of the TV to watch Sesame Street. And that's where I picked it up, because I went to school in kindergarten and somehow I could speak English. And going through school, and hearing kids make fun of accents. I mean, that was a big thing. Like, why do you talk like that? And why don't the word is this way and that way? It was just a sort of a constant correction of how I might say something. So I remember coming home. I was little, maybe 6, 7, 8. And my mother was speaking to me in Spanish, and I said, "Speak English. This is America. You have to speak English." That I remember that was so little, and I remember saying that. And from that age, I also remember being obsessed with being articulate, like obsessed, that somehow I had connected the fact that I would say a word in a certain manner, or I would, speak in Spanglish, or, the Boricua, right, would come out. And that was somehow a signal of a lack of intelligence. I made those two connections really early on. And I just remember being obsessed with being articulate. And I went on to go to high school, and that was really hard, because I was a part of a program called Prep for Prep, which was about helping inner city kids of color in New York City get into private schools, because the disparity between public schools and private schools in New York is an abomination, as I'm sure everybody knows. And I had to go through all of this rigorous stuff, and I was able to get in, and it was an amazing program that I give a lot of credit to for who I am now. But I get put into these schools that are all white, they're all affluent. And I am neither one of those things. And that to then sort of overcompensate with a constant need to assimilate, like, how do I fit into this? Oh, these people all have country houses. Okay. Oh, these people all dress like this. It was just a constant observation and reaction to what world I was in, and constantly trying to fit in. And I had this high school teacher, a history teacher, and I wrote a paper, and he told me, he gave me a bad grade on the paper and he told me to come see him. And he told me, it's just not sophisticated, is what he said. He said, I feel like the way you write and the way you talk about things just lacks sophistication.
Oh,
And that, I think that probably, that probably crushed me academically, and so he said, let me know if you want any help, but like, amp up the sophistication. So I went to the library and I got a thesaurus, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means, sophistication. I don't know. I don't understand that. So for almost every word that I would write down in that paper, I would go to a thesaurus and find a different word for that word, just to make it, like, okay, what's the cooler word, the more sophisticated. Anyway, I handed this thing in, and I'm sure if I read it now, I'd be like, what is this? This is not even English. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then he wrote me back being, he kind of was like, you don't get it. It's, this is not what I mean. So anyway, I'm kind of off topic here, but that's what assimilation meant to me. It meant like fitting in, behaving a certain way, picking up those norms that were all the anti-norms that, that I was a part of. And, sitting in sometimes these like family gatherings where I really wanted to do some merengue, but being like, but that's not what I'm supposed to be doing, because I'm supposed to be doing this over, like, which one do I go do? Do I go and hang out over here on this side, or do I go and do this merengue thing? And that was kind of how it was for a long time, until, it felt like no one really noticed that I was maybe Latina anymore. Like, maybe I did a really good job. It's messed up, right? Like, was I so good at assimilating that everybody forgot that people were like, oh, I didn't even know you were Latina. I had a friend, I was
really?
talking to my friend about this. She's like one of my lifelong friends. And I was telling her I was really struggling with this during, everything that was happening in social justice last year. And she said, oh, I had no idea that you were Latina. I just always thought you were white. And part of me was like, how is that possible? If you look at me, that you wouldn't pick that up. And then the other part of me was like, damn, I was good. I did it. Like, I could not have perfected assimilation more, So that's, those are some of the things I'm observing now. Like, oh, that was the time that this happened. Oh, I made a conscious decision here. And, listen, I got to give myself a break, because that was about survival at the time.
Yeah.
We know where assimilation comes from, right? That was like,
Mhm.
we were afraid La Migra was going to pick us up and send us back, like
Yeah.
that was real. But the repercussions of that they're pretty significant.
Yeah, that brings me to my niece in Florida. She, like, her grandmother typically, watches her, and now with quarantine, and her first language in many ways was actually Spanish. In the house, grandmother would talk to her in Spanish, etc. And she picked up a lot of words to the point where, like, she can speak in Spanish, right? But then when she started going to school and she didn't hear Spanish being spoken to, I'm assuming in her head was like, whoa, like, why does no one understand me? Why can I not communicate to anyone? And what that translated to was that now when she comes back home and speaks to her grandmother, she tells her grandmother, no Spanish, no Spanish, Spanish, no. And she demands to be spoken to in English in many ways, right? So it just reminded me to your story of, being surrounded by people that, may not look like you or may not speak the same language. And then, I think it's just like a biological desire to fit in, right? It's just like our desire to be in groups, our desire to be a part of something that is bigger than us. So I think that's natural.
Yeah, it is all about that. It is about, you're right. It's a primal need to belong,
Yeah.
to be recognized, to be cared for. And, again, like back then, to be singled out
Mhm.
was a bad thing. You did not want to stand out. It was not the right thing to do. Now, it's actually about that. It's more about being in touch with who you are and being able to express that with a ton of comfort and safety and ease. And it is a struggle to do that, because I don't always believe that the world is ready for that. Maybe certain people, certain groups, certain companies, certain whatever are ready, but not always, not always. Because it's been suppressed for so long. I'm not really sure people know what they're asking for when they're saying, bring your authentic, true self to work, or to this or to that. I don't know that everybody knows what that even is, because I just think we've been suppressed for a while.
I'm curious too, because you mentioned this, like, dynamic between like you assimilating in many ways, but then you still have to go back home to family, and you still have to play with this dynamic around like, am I being Latina enough? Like, how did you feel in those situations?
I think I just felt honestly like I belonged to neither,
Mhm.
because I would go to school and not fit in because I just couldn't. I just wasn't that kind of a person. And, school, that I feel badly for so many of the kids that I went to school with, because I'm not sure anything was ever done to prepare those kids for people like me coming into the school. They would have never experienced that many people of color coming in through this program. And so there were moments where, I felt like they thought I was taking their spots in AP classes, or of course she got into Harvard. They're doing that whole affirmative action thing. It was definitely present. I mean, that was everywhere, but no one educated anybody about it. We were just kind of, put into these schools. And again, like, I'm so grateful for that opportunity. But at the time, there was no real attention paid to the sociological impact for me and for the students. So that was what school was like. And then I was the only kid that would take the subway about an hour and a half to go into Queens. Most kids took the crosstown bus. Most kids walked home. Most kids, did whatever. But I had to take the subway for an hour and a half deep into Queens. Nobody lived in Queens. And then I would go home and, I would have to make dinner. I would have to iron the clothes. I would have to clean the house. I would have to, whatever it took to put, food on the table, kind of thing. So it didn't, and that didn't feel right. And school didn't feel right. So I think I just felt misplaced a lot. I didn't really know what was how I was supposed to be. I had moments where I enjoyed both parts of that, for sure. Moments where, I remember watching telenovelas and thinking like, this is the jam. I love that. That was like a great part of culture, and the food was amazing, and the constant sort of, laughter and dancing, and how much music played a role in our lives. And I loved that. And the family, that was wonderful. And then, at school, I loved just the exposure to things I would have never been exposed to, whether it's a kind of sport. I love literature. I studied French, like just stuff I would never, ever have experienced outside of it. So in some ways, I had the best of both worlds, but I never really felt like I was fully in one or fully in the other. And the fact that I had a foot in each one of them, it made me, less easy to put into a box. People, I think, didn't know how to react to me, except to maybe the way that people internalize my Latin culture. I remember in school all the time I was asked, can you talk like Rosie Perez? I mean, that was like a constant request. And you know what? The most embarrassing part about that, honestly, is that I would do it because it was funny and it was a way to connect. I didn't know, that was just not an okay thing to do. I was like a performance, for people. And they would ask me to do that over and over and over again. And that I think was kind of tough. It was really tough.
How do you feel about it now, looking back at it?
I think I have more. For a while, I think I was that person who was like, I really didn't like high school. I just really didn't like it. I didn't fit in. It was tough. Even though I appreciated that I got an outstanding education, I
Mhm.
wonder how much more outstanding of an education I could have gotten had I felt safe and comfortable. But I still got an outstanding education. Listen, I got to go to a great high school. I got to go to Harvard. I mean, I can't look back on it and be like, it was terrible. I think part of what I struggle with sometimes is, I mean, you just heard me say it, I got to go to, you know,
Yeah.
as if I were like, yeah, I got to go. I mean, I earned it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So sometimes I struggle with that. That's like a big thing that I talk about a lot, is like, it's not my fault that the system was rigged against so many of us for so long. Like, I earned my place and I did well in my studies, and I worked hard and I earned that and deserved that. So I love all of that very much. I think now I look back at high school and I think I feel much more sympathy for the kids that I went to school with, because they wouldn't know. They didn't know. They weren't helped through that. We weren't kind of coached together through this experience. So I feel maybe more sympathy than I would have expected to feel, versus like those kids were just, mean and racist. Like, I don't think that's true. I just think they didn't know. And so of course they would respond to something, and seeing me laugh while I do something would make them want me to do it again. I mean, we were just kind of living in this world
Yeah.
that was created for us.
Yeah, no, I've had very similar experiences where, whether it be microaggressions or whether it be people doing some like racist things to me. And I don't necessarily think that in every one of those instances, the person is racist. I, in many ways, don't think that they knew better, right? Which is kind of like why I want to have, part of these conversations are or for people that look like us to know that they're not alone. But another part of another reason for these conversations is for people that don't look like us to just realize that, maybe something that they did was inappropriate and they didn't know about it, and they, may learn something through this. I always think it's interesting too, because I think, when people talk about code switching and assimilating and hiding who they are, I think professional settings or work environments are sort of an easy go-to or a scapegoat to say, oh, I'm not comfortable being myself because no one around me looks like me, right? But I think if we like actually reflect, like we start doing this assimilation and code switching at such an early age, it just, by the time that we get to a professional setting, we're just experts because we've just been doing it for 25 years, let's say. Let's start off when like you first started entering the workforce. Like, just what was that experience like when you first started working?
I think that it was actually harder than I thought it was going to be, because I loved college, and I felt like I was confident in myself, and I believed in myself, and I was at ease with it. And I had a wonderful experience in college of being surrounded by a lot of people, including Latin people, that I felt like I could be myself with, and I felt the most comfortable I'd ever felt. When I went into
What
the
was it?
industry.
I'm so curious. Sorry. What was it about that college experience that made you feel so comfortable?
Level playing field. I mean, I
Okay.
say that level playing field, like, for me, little things, when I was little, like we didn't have any money. I mean, my sister and I were picking up bottles on the street, to help put the money, together for the food on the table. It was bad, and then I would go to these schools where, I couldn't, I was left out of so many things because we didn't have enough money to put food on the table. How am I going to ask if I could please, go to this person's house or go to the movies or it just wasn't, it's not possible. Then I get to college and I'm like, this is amazing. Everybody gets a computer. Like, this is amazing. Like, we all get to eat in the cafeteria and no one will know if I had to pick up bottles. Yes. Amazing. That it was level from that. We all lived in the same crappy dorms, with the same crappy beds, I mean, some people had their stuff like tricked out, and some people's parents sent care packages, and, I had to do work study and double up the jobs, but like it was level, and that was amazing. And so because we were all the same, and I'm not an idiot. I know we were not all the same, but we were kind of all, for me, that was what a level playing field looked like. And then I just had a pocket of just friends. I had New York friends. I had my Latin friends. I had, athlete friends. I had people who studied literature. I just had lots of friends in different places. And I felt no one knew about that back there. And I think that was what was amazing. And I mean, I did so well in school and I loved it. It was incredible. What was interesting about coming back into the professional world, again, I say this with a tremendous amount of gratitude, that program, Prep for Prep, helped me find a job in advertising. And at the time, the agency that I joined wanted to be more diverse. So there were maybe 10 of us that started on day one, all of us people of color. And we sat down in this person's office, and this person explained how advertising works. There are, writers, there are art directors, there are producers, there are, account management. And he explained all the different departments, and he went around the room and he said, okay, which one do you want to be in? And I said, well, I wrote for the paper in college. And I did really well in English. And I really did super well in my essays. I would like to be a writer. And he said, great, you'll be in account management. And it shut the door for me, like right away, and I felt quickly like I had no right to advocate for myself because I was being given this opportunity. How ungrateful of me to, I just got to get a job, put my head down and make money. Like, I'm not going to talk about, I graduated from Harvard and I wrote for the paper. Like, that's not a small thing, it wasn't a small thing. And I got shut down right away. And, I now understand it a little bit more to know, that people expect you to have a book and some experience in this specific kind of thing. But, that's not what we're trying to do with, the movement that we're trying to do in marketing and advertising, and that started, a ways back. So I kind of lost confidence right off the bat, like right away. I was just put back down. And I remember I worked for a woman who would make me go get her orange soda downstairs in the cafeteria. And she would send me back down if I didn't put enough ice cubes in it. Like, it was just, I was, okay, so this is the way it's going to be then. All right, we're back to this, we're back to this. So at some point when I switched to a different company, I just made a decision to just be the best account person on the planet. I was like, you're going to act like this is a second-class job. It is not. I'm going to make it amazing. And that, that just was what I wanted to be and how driven I became. And, I was very, very successful at it. But that I'll never forget that I got shut down in the beginning. And maybe, again, one of those moments where I wonder, like, what would have been? What could I have been? Was I supposed to be that? And then I quickly say, well, listen, it worked out. I'm the CEO of an amazing agency. I work, everything worked out. It's great. What am I complaining about? It's fine. It's fine. It's just a moment where a door closed for me that, that just reminded me that I was less than, according to, some people.
How did that force you to react in your day-to-day? I'm wondering, did it force you to hide a bit of who you were? In that setting, I'd love to just understand, like, how comfortable were you being yourself after that moment where you were put down?
I was just small, I was small for a while. I think it took a year for me to be noticed again. I remember getting a review and somebody said, "Oh, I've noticed that you've been working on these things and they're really good." But I just felt like I'm going to put my head down and just do what's in front of me, because I'm not really allowed to just go outside those lines or take any risks. And, but I delivered good product and I think people noticed. And, I ended up making some terrific friends at the company. But, they were all white, it's fine. It's just, again, like, it leaves me with that question of, would I have opened myself up to more people of color at the company? There weren't that many, or, who could I have been? How could I have expressed myself? Could I have gotten where I am faster? Like, there's no way for me to ever know those things. But when you close that door so early to someone, just like I was told I was not sophisticated, those things shape your life forever, forever. So even though I could tell you I'm a really good writer, I have partners at work who are like, "You're such a good writer. You should write this and write that. Put this piece out. I love the way you talk about this." I'm like, I'm not. I can't. It takes me a lot to be like, I deserve to write this. I am good at writing this. I'm going to put this out to write it. Like, I still have to really work my brain to do that, and we got to realize that we do that to people.
Yeah.
Really early on, we mess them up like that,
I'm so curious too, because I've had a couple of people on the podcast that are like in executive positions, and I'm always curious. I'm like, is it easier for you to be yourself when you get to a certain level?
What a great question. I think I think some parts of it have been easier and some parts of it maybe are difficult. I'll tell you what makes it easier, that we're having a national conversation about this makes it easier. So in general, I think people are disarmed enough to allow for those different behaviors and cultural expressions to kind of shine through. They're welcoming them more than ever before. We're building programs like ERGs around it. We're actively hiring people. So I could walk into the office and, see people that, I can be more myself around, right? Like I see, I'm just thinking about a couple of people I see at work. I'm like, oh yeah, what's happening? Like that instant, like, let's just talk about it like that, that I think allows for executives or me to feel that way. So I do think that the person who said, I don't give a, is right, because in my best moments, I think it's not only my desire, but I think it is my responsibility to try to lean into that and own it more than ever, so that people can see that, that it's okay to bring that part of who you are into work every day. And moreover, to see that I happen to have partners at work who embrace it and love it and respect it like crazy. I think that dynamic is so important for people to see. And I have that, and I see that, and I show that. However, I'm not going to tell you that there aren't moments where I look back, and not necessarily at my own company, but when we're out, when I'm representing, to your point, and you read the room and you're like, okay, this is not the time to bring it out.
Yeah.
This is not the time to be like, oh yeah, this is how we're going to do, this is not the time for me to be my expressive, fully Latin, passionate self, just because I know it's not going to work. There are moments that I have walked out of meetings or conferences when I have felt so Hispanic, so Latina. And I don't mean that, I don't even know if I mean that in a good way or in a bad way, but like that I maybe showed 25% of my Latina self, but it came across as like megaphone Latina, like turned to 11.
What did you do? Like what made you feel so Latina? Was it the crowd reaction? Was it something you said?
Yeah, I think it was the makeup of the crowd, that there wasn't, there wasn't a Latina in the room, or there wasn't somebody of color in the room. I think it was the restraint with which everybody else spoke, and the fact that I felt myself being louder than everybody else and more expressive. And the moments where sometimes I wanted to dip into a Spanish word or a half Spanish word to explain it, because there isn't the word like that, and just people's reaction to it was like, wow, she's a lot, you know what I'm talking about, right? That expression where, you either people say it to you or you feel it back, where people are like, she's a lot, she's coming in hot, she's aggressive, she's spicy, right? I've gotten that, like, ooh, you spicy, you bring in the spice today, like that. Those kinds of reactions sometimes make it difficult. And so again, I feel like I agree with everybody that has probably come on your podcast before to say, in some ways it is easier and it is my responsibility. And I'm grateful to have partners and a company in which, it is more accepted than in other places. But there are moments when I feel myself adjusting myself. This is the time to put on this is Harvard Nancy. Let's do Harvard Nancy. Let's do CEO Nancy. Let's you have to kind of do that a little. I have felt the need to kind of do that a little. Is that wrong? Is that right? I don't know, but that's the truth.
I would think, like, if you would get to a certain level professionally, like all that criticism or those comments would go away. But you're saying that in some ways you still receive some of that feedback, depending on what version of yourself you present.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I think that, I don't, back to sort of how we started this conversation, I don't think everybody is, I don't think we're talking about, sort of blatant racism as much as people, I think, are reacting a certain way. And remember, I think I was brought up in a world in which I was told not to be loud, to be very quiet, to be, to sort of suppress who I am. And so I find those comments sometimes difficult for me as a person who's been trying to do the opposite. That doesn't mean that any of those things are, I do come in hot sometimes. I am spicy. It's all true. It's real. I come in with a lot of passion. They know.
Yeah.
But I do think what's easier now is to be able to certainly with my partners and my peers and my company, to be able to be like, I am spicy, right? Like, let's get this stuff done. And that is easy, and that is fine, and that is wonderful. I think sometimes it's the outside world,
Yeah.
outside of the comfort of my own place, that, that I sometimes feel extra Latina, extra.
Yeah. I think there's two sides to it, right? Because I think like on one side, there's just like the words that are used. The words that are used to describe us, for example, like spicy, or like other people would be described as a what is it, a go-getter, or like he's a disruptor, so I don't think it's like that they're necessarily wrong. I think we're being mislabeled, but I think often, for example, I'll share a personal story. Like, there was one time where I was labeled as aggressive at work, and I had a conversation with my therapist about it, and she asked me, you know, it was a situation where I disagreed in a meeting with my team. They got loud, I got loud back, but at the end of it, I got labeled as aggressive. So my therapist, shout out to therapy, by the way. So as
Good.
my
It
therapist
has
asked
saved
me,
me time and time again, so I feel you.
yeah. So she asked me, Pavel, were you being aggressive? And I was like, you know what? Maybe I was. And she said, that's fine. They often say that people that use a louder tone, they're using the voice of the unheard. And she asked me,
Mm.
have you ever felt unheard before by your team? And I said, oh, yes, all the time. I say things in a meeting. No one listens. Someone else shares the same idea with less data to back it up, to support his or her claim, and they get acknowledged as a genius, right? So going back to that earlier example of you sort of like communication and feeling heard, and being well spoken as like a strength that you wanted to create or build for yourself, like that was me in corporate settings. But I don't think, well, not that I don't think, like I know early in my career, I wasn't taught how to communicate my emotions properly. So I mean, I think the criticism was fair, as probably like me being quote unquote aggressive. I just wish I had the necessary tools at the time to tell my teammates, hey, everyone, I feel unheard because of this, and this reason. Can we have a productive conversation about it, so that we don't get to the point where I'm labeled aggressive and it tarnishes my career in a certain company, right? So I think many times we're labeled things negatively before we're able to build up the necessary skills to like prepare us for that situation. You know what I mean?
I do. And I think that point of the voice of the unheard is like, ooh, that's a lot of power in that concept, because I think it is true. And I think we sometimes embody not just our own feeling of being unheard, but maybe our whole, Latin generation, or, Latin family. Like, it's a big thing. I do think that there are, what I've noticed is, because I think we've talked about some of the sort of difficult moments where I couldn't be myself, and there's equal merit to talking about the moments where somebody maybe opened the door a little bit,
Yes. Yeah.
and they're kind of small examples, but I'll remember that when I was at my second job, I had a boss who, we were doing like a brainstorm,
Mhm.
and I'm not into the brainstorm. I didn't want to do the brainstorm. I was just feeling like lazy and not into it, and just mad with the world. And
Mhm.
I attended the brainstorm, and I sat in the back with my arms folded, like, laid back, like I didn't care. I didn't participate. And then when the brainstorm was over, I left. I didn't pick up the easels. I didn't do anything. And I was, that was my job. It was clearly my job. And she called me into her office, and she let me have it. And she said, we want to hear you. We want to hear your voice. You clean up those easels too. I'm not getting you out of that, but like you need to, we want to hear from you. And not that she sort of, she let me feel like my voice was welcomed,
Mhm.
and whatever I was carrying, maybe she knew that I just needed to be given permission, and in the
Mhm.
world that we live in, I just needed to be given permission. A door needed to be open. And she gave me some really helpful feedback about, how I communicate sometimes. And then I turned on, and I remember giving an idea in a meeting that turned into a product
Mm.
for the company that we were working on. I'm like, oh my God, the power of my ideas, the power of my voice. This is amazing. That was a great example. And then I always use the story of, like, a company I worked at for a really long time. I was there for a year. I've noticed this pattern where it takes me a minute to just feel comfortable and safe before I
Same.
turn on,
For me, for
right?
me, it's my first performance review cycle. After that, I'm so good.
Well,
I
it's
need
so
that. I need
funny.
that validation.
Yes, it's funny you say that, because that's my example. Is I went in for my performance review after being there for 1 year at this company, and I was like, I'm clearly killing it, like, walked in, I'm like, what's this guy going to tell me? And he said, you're not as good as I thought you would be. Like, where have you been? I thought, you talked about this in your interview. I haven't seen this. Like, I really wanted you to help me with this and with that. Like, where are you? And again, like, after that, I never looked back. It was like, oh, I'm being told you are welcomed, come in. We want to see everything from you, like, speak up, do this, do that. And I think those moments where people, by the way, in both of those examples, the people who gave me the feedback were my bosses, and they were white.
Mhm.
And both of those people probably gave me more confidence than anybody else has, to say, my voice is welcomed, and they want
Right.
to hear from me. So I think I got to give a shout out to people who give the feedback
Yeah.
direct, and in that, then open the door for the voice to be heard.
I love that example. I think in particular, I love it because when people think authenticity, I think many people, their minds automatically go to culture, but it goes so far beyond that. Like, there are just values that are unique to us that that someone else just may not care about, right? So, for example, like, part of my authenticity is like being courageous enough to speak up, right? To be outspoken. But part of that authenticity, like, we hide that part of ourselves because we don't want to be labeled as spicy, as too much, or even the idea of disagreeing. Like, I for so long, I never wanted to disagree with someone in a meeting. I waited till the meeting's over and I got them on the side. I was like, hey, like, I don't think that's the right thing, because I didn't want to be seen as like combative or whatever,
Right.
insert whatever negative word. So I think the fact that, I want to show people that it's not just about like bringing a flag to work and like waving it in the air. You know what I mean? It's about like giving ourselves permission to
Yeah.
embrace things like being outspoken, something as simple as that. So I love that you highlighted that. And as we come to an end, I just want to leave you with this final question. Obviously you said earlier in the interview, like, your journey isn't complete despite, where you are in life. You're still working on parts of yourself and bringing more parts of your authenticity to work. What's one thing that continues to inspire you to be your most authentic self?
I have to say, it's the people that I work with. When we went through, everything we went through last summer, we were having so many conversations at work about, what it means to bring your authentic self. Do we truly have a safe culture? And the stuff that I'm talking about now would have never been possible to talk about if it wasn't for the people at work that allowed me to have that safe expression. Like, it is scary to tell people I don't know what it means to
Yeah.
bring my authentic self to work, because I've been trying to hide that thing for 45 years. And the sort of open arms that I got as a result of sharing that vulnerability, that insecurity, that big identity question that I have right now, was so inspiring. And it keeps me talking about that. When I have people say to me, well, that's because it was about assimilation. That was because for so many years people thought you were a product of affirmative action. Like, there's just such a common understanding of what I'm going through, even if it's a generational thing that is not necessarily applicable in the same way today. And I would say that kind of thing keeps me inspired, and keeps me going, because it's a hard truth to tell, and it's not a popular one that people want to hear right now. I think people would love me to be the person to say, yes, I bring my authentic self to work. You know, I am more Latina today than I was yesterday. You know, like I know people want me to say that, but that is not my truth. So the ability to speak my truth as it stands right now and feel safe and comfortable doing it inspires me and convinces me that we're making more progress now than maybe we give ourselves credit for. And we have got to just take a moment and pause and just appreciate the progress, because this thing is hard. This journey is long.